Hi, everybody. Although the word genocide wasn't coined until 1944 by Raphael Lemkin out of the context of the Second World War, we have centuries of examples of it in practice. This talk, titled Racial Time Immemorial Queer Feelings of Genocide, is a very unorganized mix of my thoughts, written for a local Northamptonshire, UK audience, for a community event run by local charity The Happy Hood. I ground my talk today, or whenever you're watching this, in the definition of queer that Bell Hooks offered in 2014, as she informs us that of queer not as being about who you are having sex with, that can be a dimension of it, but queer as being about the self that is at odds with everything around it and that has to invent and create and find a place to speak and to thrive and to live. Furthermore, historian Charles Mills and racial time as how continued exposure to racial violence manipulates people's experiences of time, um, people's experiences and perceptions of time. This could show up in experiences, everything from daily microaggressions on the ground level, culminating in genocides as well. I wanted to discuss genocide more widely than Thanksgiving because there are a number of resources on the internet and other places that people can go to look at about the history of Thanksgiving. And I wanted to give people in Northampton something that you might not find through a Google search as well. While I was not at the Reclaim the Night march a few nights ago, I was informed that by local people that every year men film, laugh, and jeer at women who are walking down the street in affirmation of their rights. Women's local experiences of male violence are part of a bigger issue of violence against women and girls around the world. As far as genocide is concerned, however, and escaping those contexts of violence as well, women and girls account for a high number of its victims in many global contexts, from rape and sexual assault as a byproduct of colonial violence, historically and now, to how men in relationships with women fleeing terror have in cases used women's immigration status as a tool of emotional blackmail to take ownership over women's bodies too. In Indigenous contexts, missing person statistics are not compiled for Indigenous women in the United States. There are numerous articles, but I would like to bring you to the film, also Wind River, and it's Hollywood, so take what you can from it, and don't expect it to be 100% because it's a Hollywood movie. So, and that film explores this subject via a missing persons inquiry on a reservation in Wyoming. In the US, nobody knows how many are missing. In Canada, however, Indigenous women and girls are 6 times more likely to be murdered than other groups. And while only accounting for 2 to 3% of the population, they are 5 to 7% of murder victims. It shows how colonial histories and colonial terror are not just in the past, but continue to infringe on what we call the now. Scholars of African cosmology, people who study the universe, show um, show what Ghislaine Kunani further writes time time boundaries taken for granted by suggesting that the past exists in a state of constant merging with the present, so that what we experience as the now is constantly intruding upon by an ever present and ever impinging past, a past by ancestral entities, suffering, and spirits capable of influencing and communicating with us. Global genocides are happening in what we call the now, wherever the now is. But ancestors walk amongst us. Toni Morrison further wrote, when you kill the ancestor, you kill yourself. Alice Walker, as well, another African American novelist, further said, I know what it feels like to be supported by ancestors. These are people that got me as far in life as I am. Past, present, and future may be entirely subjective. Sociologist Avery Gordon describes haunting as isolated yet repeated experience when home becomes unfamiliar, when your bearings on the world lose direction, when the over and done with comes alive. Haunting raises ghosts and changes the experiences of intimeness, the way we separate the past, the present, and the future. Ancestors bring me to Einstein, who believed that ideas of past, present, and future, and past, present, and future to be one and the same, as a persistent, stubborn illusion he described. Science philosopher and theoretical physicist Sabine Hossenfelder further says that this perplexing consequence of special relativity has been dubbed the block universe by physicists. In this block universe, the future, present, and the past exist in the same way. It's just that we do not experience them in the same way. And if all times exist similarly, then all our past selves and grandparents, for example, are alive the same way our present selves are. In 1962, scientist and novelist Arthur C. Clarke wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Typically, many Black cultural expressions may look like magic to the untrained eye, and this may be why colonizers refer to them as demonic, including dance, including African dance expressions and music, because my enslaved ancestors talked about their experiences also through their bodies. The appropriation of these body feelings through white supremacy is another genocide, extracting these practices of meaning as well, excluding those who developed them in the first place, as we see through the corruption of African and wellness practices by a particular grift of middle class white women as well. This is something I noticed in my PhD interviews, being told about local blues parties and sound system raves in the 1960s and 70s in Northampton, see the pictures on the right hand side as well, and how at those raves and parties, Caribbean people locally would express themselves through their bodies, dance as a communication tool, where relating to oneself via the flesh, through dance and song was language, like the dance we call the wine, a gyration of hips performed to music like calypso and reggae. These practices are part of what Lantoinette Steins calls ancestral data and Carolyn Cooper calls noises in the blood, data that passes through each successive generation. Furthermore, historian archivist Shane DeLande further writes how drumming was a communication form used amongst enslaved Africans, and it was considered anti-Christian and banned by the British government to suppress aspects of street carnival. Similar acts of erasure were imposed on Indigenous people around the world. At the 350th anniversary of the Pilgrims' landing at Plymouth Rock in 1970, Massachusetts, Wamsutter Frank James spoke, fighting colonial theft, murder, and disease that came via European colonizers in the 17th century in America, or in Massachusetts, in what became the United States. Columbus landing in what is modern-day Haiti in 1492 set the precedent for what happened afterwards with the genocide of indigenous people that took place around the world as a continually unfolding history. Sara Ahmed talks about the past as living rather than dead. The past lives in the very wounds that remain open in the present. As someone that studies films, TV, media, and storytelling as mechanisms that reproduce violence as much as they tell stories, I see the colonial narratives within the niceness of popular culture. The late Archbishop and anti-apartheid activist Desmond Tutu talked about this in terms of Israel and Palestine, and he said, "Part of my own concern for what's happening there, Israel, is in fact not what is happening to the Palestinians, but is what the Israelis are doing to themselves. When you go to those checkpoints and see these soldiers behaving abominably badly, they are not aware that when you carry out dehumanizing policies, whether you like it or not, those policies dehumanize the perpetrator. Liberation politics also means freeing the oppressor too. In media, I come back to what in academia we call cultural hegemony, which over time came to study how popular culture, narratives like films, or even street performance, like the Jubilee celebrations, comes to show how the ruling class dominate in a capitalist society. Stuart Hall believed art did not just exist for pure entertainment, but it was a site of challenging power structures as well. Keeping the public ignorant allows the establishment to hold on to their power. The idea of the ruling class is very much the society of the day's ruling ideas, including in education, policing, criminal justice, and so on, and thus live on to do violence physically as well as intellectually that stops us or helps to stop us imagining a different kind of world. But the word genocide wasn't actually coined until 1944, yet we have centuries of examples of it. Things don't just become real when we think of the words to describe them. Today's pushes against genocide also expose a need for a more nuanced take of what we mean by the term. The United Nations' definition was developed out of a specific context of the Nazi Holocaust in World War II and does not account for the which, ways in which specific groups are killed by more covert means over longer periods of time as well. In the context of Black communities, sociologist Christina Sharp writes about this as living in the wake, means living the history and present of terror as the ground of everyday Black existence. Put another way, living in the wake means living and with terror in that in much of what passes for public discourse about terror, we, Black people, become the carriers of terror. This is everywhere clear as we think about those in the United States who can weaponize sidewalks and shoot themselves while handcuffed. Those Black people transmigrating the African continent towards the Mediterranean and then to Europe who are imagined as insects, swarms, vectors of disease, familiar danger, disaster. So Black people who are killed through more covert means over longer stretches of time and through normalized ways of existence, is that also genocide as well? I would argue that it is, but because of the definitions that we have of it being very, 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 very narrow as well, that will always be up for debate. Most of us probably learn little about genocide in school, and if we did, it was in the context of the Nazi Holocaust. What is interesting about the Holocaust is it was colonial violence imported into fortress white Europe, notably after the German Empire had already tested it in southern Africa and seen earlier successes of the slave trade. Anti-blackness as the baseline for human suffering, just it never ends with us. To compare the Nazi Holocaust to what happened in Kenya, for example, with the killing of 1 million Kikuyu people, shatters the image of the UK has made for itself. So that was in the 1950s. Churchill is heroic because he is not Hitler. In short, colonial ideology is what tethers the genocide of indigenous people to Jews and Black people as much as it does to the Indians killed in the Bengali famine of 1943. Likewise, successive famines in Ireland. Time is as familiar as day passing into night. Yet many probably haven't considered how racism shapes time and reality. So what is time? Our views of the world is the past has happened while the future is still open. So as I leave you, I ask, is there a limit to our ability to imagine better worlds? There may be limits to physical imagination, but there are no limits to the intellectual or spiritual changes there as well. And here I come back to Marvel's Doctor Strange, based on the comics. They themselves based on elements of philosophy too. And the Ancient Ones tells us, you think you know how the world works. You think that this material universe is all there is. What is real? What mysteries lie beyond the reach of your senses? At the root of existence, mind and matter meet. Thoughts shape reality. This universe is only one of an infinite number, worlds without end. Who are you in this vast multiverse, Mr. Strange? And I'll leave you there with all of this to ponder. And if you have any comments or questions or so on, you can send me to them in an email, so tradeventour.com/contact, or you can leave them in the comment section as well, and we can have a conversation in the comments. Thanks very much for listening.